A poor boy said, "Don't eat that." The billionaire wouldn't have listened if he hadn't seen it himself. During a luxurious dinner at an upscale Manhattan café, something happened that would forever change the lives of three people. Behind the veil of wealth and elegance, something sinister was unfolding, but the truth would find its defender from a place no one expected. At Café Belluror, everything was as flawless as always. Crystal glasses sparkled on marble tables, catching the soft, warm light. Waiters moved silently, as if gliding across a stage. Outside, the noise of evening Manhattan rumbled faintly, just a muffled echo of a less refined world. Bernard Chambers sat at his favorite table by the window. He was 72 and looked just as one would expect of a man from his world, wearing an expensive, immaculately pressed suit, gold cufflinks, and an antique watch on his wrist. He ate slowly, with the dignity of someone who had nothing left to prove, to himself or anyone else. Next to him sat Marissa, his wife, 40 years his junior. She was slim, polished, with flawless makeup and a perfect hairstyle. She looked at the soup placed before her with a soft smile. Her movements were precise, almost theatrical. Now and then she glanced at Bernard, lovingly, attentively, a little pensively. "Haven't you tried their signature tomato soup today?" she asked, pushing the bowl gently toward him. "No, I'm not hungry," Bernard replied, leaning back. "Maybe later." He returned to reading something on his phone. Marisa sat quietly for a few seconds, then with a swift and smooth motion, poured the contents of a small capsule into the soup. It took less than a second. She chose the moment when the waiter had turned away and Bernard was still looking at his phone. She stirred the soup slightly. Her face didn't twitch. No one noticed. Almost no one. Across the street, a 12-year-old boy stood by the window. Pressing his forehead to the glass, he tried not to draw attention. His eyes were wide open. He didn't know the name of the dish in front of the woman or who those people were, but he saw her drop something in, and he knew it wasn't seasoning. The boy's name was Malik. He had lived on the streets of Manhattan for nearly a year. Politics, fashion, and business meant nothing to him. But he knew the smell of food when he hadn't eaten in days. He knew what dangerous people looked like, and he could read gestures, faces, and eyes. Survival had taught him that. Malik stepped away from the window, almost as if pulled by an invisible force. He stood in hesitation. What could he do? He wouldn't even be allowed past the cafe's door. He had tried to sneak into restaurants before, for leftovers, for warmth. He was usually thrown out, sometimes beaten. Once, the police were called. But this time, something inside him grew louder than fear. He returned to the door, pushed it, and stepped inside. The silence inside was overwhelming. He knew he didn't belong. Torn hoodie, dirty sneakers, a face untouched by clean water for too long. Everyone turned to look. A waiter immediately moved toward him. "Hey, you can't be in here," he began. Malik didn't stop. He walked toward Bernard's table until someone grabbed his arm. "Please, sir, don't eat that," he shouted. "Your wife put something in your soup." The world froze for a second. Malik's voice cut through the room, sharp, desperate. "What did you say?" Bernard turned, frowning. Marissa laughed, a strained, fake laugh. "Oh my God, what nonsense! Who let this child in? He's obviously homeless, probably on drugs." "Look at him. I saw her. She poured something into the soup," Malik insisted. "She had a small capsule." The waiter, still holding the boy's arm, called for the manager. Other guests began whispering. Some pulled out their phones. Someone was recording. Bernard set his phone down and looked closely at Marisa. Sensing his gaze, her face changed, not frightened, but irritated. "Bernard, this is absurd," she said. "Obviously, the boy just wants attention, or money. Don't listen to him. Bernard stared silently at the bowl, then at Marisa. Suddenly, he said to the waiter, "Please bring a new bowl of soup, from the same batch, and call security, but don't let anyone leave. Not him." He nodded at Malik. "Not my wife." Marisa went pale. Malik stood still, trembling inside. He didn't know whether he had just saved someone or destroyed everything for himself and others. But he knew one thing: he had done the right thing. A long night was ahead. When security arrived, a heavy silence fell over the room. Guests at nearby tables froze, unsure how to react. Some still believed it was a misunderstanding. Others sensed something serious had just begun. The manager nervously whispered with the waiter, unsure what to do next. Bernard sat quietly, observing Malik. The boy was breathing heavily but stood upright. He didn't run. He didn't look away. "What's your name?" Bernard asked calmly. "Malik, sir." "Where do you live?" "Nowhere right now. Sometimes a shelter, sometimes the street." Marisa sighed in frustration. "This is a farce. Bernard, are you really going to entertain a homeless child who probably just wants to go viral or get paid?" "Isn't it obvious?" Bernard slowly turned to her. "Why are you so sure about his motives?" Marisa tensed. "Because I'm not an idiot. He just accused me of attempted murder. Did you hear what he said?" "I did. And I hear how you're trying to shift focus from the real issue." He turned to the waiter. "Where's the soup my wife offered me?" "It's still on the table, sir. We haven't touched it." "Good. I want it tested. Call someone. The police, health services, I don't care who, but I want results. And I want everything documented. No one leaves until then." Marisa jumped up. "You can't be serious." "I'm very serious." The restaurant staff, stunned by this turn of events, obeyed. Someone had already called the police. Malik was still standing between the guard and Bernard. For the first time, he felt like an adult had actually heard him. It was strange and terrifying. "What exactly did you see, Malik?" Bernard asked, without raising his voice. "I was standing outside by the window. I go there a lot. Sometimes the waiters bring out leftovers. I saw your wife take something from her coat. It was a small capsule. She quickly poured it into the soup while you were looking at your phone. Then she stirred it with a spoon. It was fast, but I saw it. I know when someone's doing something they shouldn't." "And you decided to run in and tell me?" "Yes." "Why?" Malik paused for a second, then looked Bernard straight in the eye. "Because I don't know who you are, but no one deserves to be poisoned, even if you're rich, even if you're married to a beautiful woman." At that moment, one of the guests started clapping, awkwardly, quietly, but sincerely. Others exchanged glances. Marisa, feeling her control slip away, sat back down and pursed her lips. "He's lying. Street kids always lie." "Maybe," Bernard said, "but maybe he's the only one here telling the truth." 15 minutes later, the first police officers arrived, followed by food safety inspectors. The soup was carefully sealed and sent off for express testing. Everything was being recorded by the restaurant's security cameras and guests' phones. Marisa tried to remain composed, but the tension on her face grew more visible. One officer began interviewing witnesses. Another spoke with Bernard, who explained everything calmly and clearly. He requested that the boy be treated respectfully. Malik sat to the side with a glass of water. He had no idea what would happen next. He hadn't expected to be believed, but now everything felt real. "We'll test the soup," one of the officers said. "But if there's nothing in it, you understand this will be considered a false accusation. The boy could face consequences." Bernard nodded. "If there's nothing there, I'll personally help Malik, but if he's right, you need to act." An hour later, preliminary results came back. The soup did contain a substance with digoxin, a drug that in large doses can cause cardiac arrest. It's only available by prescription. The silence that followed this revelation felt like an eternity. The officer turned to Marissa. "Mrs. Chambers, please stand up. You're under arrest on suspicion of attempted murder." "This is a mistake. I don't know how it got in there. Someone set me up," she shouted, but her voice trembled. One of the officers placed her in handcuffs. The room was silent. Some guests were recording. Others simply stared in disbelief. Marissa, still protesting, was led out of the café. Bernard remained seated. He didn't eat, didn't speak. He just stared at the empty soup bowl in front of him, next to an overturned fork, behind which remained one strange detail. Until this evening, he had considered the night perfect. In the corner sat a 12-year-old boy who had just changed his life. After Marissa was taken away, the café gradually emptied. Guests left in hushed conversations. Some expressed sympathy for Bernard, some were confused, and some still suspected the whole thing might have been staged. You never know these days. Maybe it's an ad, a PR stunt, but no one touched the soup. Bernard stayed at his table. He asked the staff not to close the café early. Malik sat a table away from him, still a bit tense, holding the glass of water as if it could protect him from everything that had just happened. Finally, Bernard turned to him. "Thank you for speaking up." Malik nodded. It was hard for him to speak. He didn't know what would happen next. He could still be blamed for anything. But on the other hand, things could have ended much worse. "Are you around here often?" Bernard asked, studying the boy carefully but without hostility. "Sometimes, at Bella Aurora. They have good leftovers. Some waiters give me food, if it's not a busy night. I don't ask. I just wait outside. Doesn't always work out." "There's a basement a block away, boarded-up door. Sometimes a shelter, but it's rough there. Fights, theft. I'd rather be alone." Bernard was silent. There wasn't pity in his eyes, but something else, an emerging interest, mixed with regret. He had grown up poor too, though not on the streets. He knew how hard it was to escape the hole if no one gave you a hand. "How old are you?" 12. "And you have no parents?" "Mom's dead. Don't know my dad. Foster homes? Worse than the streets." "I tried." Malik spoke dryly, without much emotion, not because he didn't care, but because he was used to keeping things brief. No one wanted long stories from someone like him. "Why didn't you run away?" Bernard suddenly asked. "You knew you could get into trouble." "Yes, but if I stayed silent and you died, that would have been worse." Bernard looked at him for a long moment, then averted his gaze and pulled a platinum business card from his wallet. "Do you know who I am?" Malik shrugged. "No." "My name is Bernard Chambers. I'm the founder and owner of Chambers Development Group. We build homes, offices, schools, and fund some youth support programs." "Don't know if I've come across that name. I only read newspapers from trash bins. They don't write about businessmen there." Bernard smiled slightly. "Fair enough. Want me to get you some dinner?" Malik shrugged hesitantly, then nodded. Bernard waved to a waiter, who brought the boy a warm sandwich and fries. Malik ate carefully, not like a wild animal, but like someone who hasn't had a proper meal in a long time and doesn't want to seem greedy. He ate with dignity. "You have a sharp eye," Bernard noted, watching the boy neatly wrap the second half of the sandwich in a napkin to take it with him later. "I learned on the street, you have to watch your surroundings." I noticed the capsule. It was a different color than regular sugar or salt. "Your wife is pretty, but nervous. Her hand trembled. People who do bad things almost always make one extra mistake." Bernard nodded. The boy's words were startlingly accurate, and maybe he understood the truth deeper than he seemed. "Why did you decide not to trust her?" Malik was silent for a while. "Her face reminded me of someone I used to know. That person once hit me, but before that, he also smiled." Bernard looked away. He saw Marissa again, her smiles, gestures, touches, and realized how much he had ignored. Small signs, strange phone calls, frequent excuses, irritation over little things. He hadn't wanted to believe she was capable of betrayal, but facts were facts. "Are you afraid she'll come back?" he asked quietly. Malik shrugged. "Maybe, but if she does, I think you'll be ready this time." Bernard smiled faintly, then stood up. "Come on, I'll drive you. Not to the police, don't worry. I just want to know where you live. Maybe I can help." Malik froze. He wasn't sure if he could trust him, but today he had taken a risk and made the right choice. He nodded. Bernard paid the bill. On the way out, he paused for a second and glanced at the empty table. The soup remained untouched. The world he lived in no longer felt as safe and cozy, but somewhere in its shadows stood a boy who hadn't been afraid to speak the truth. And maybe that meant more than all the wealth and status. Police had already started investigating. The preliminary analysis of the soup yielded alarming results, and the case was quickly handed over to the district attorney. There were many questions and little time. The presence of journalists, leaked footage on social media, all of it fueled the situation. The story of a wealthy man poisoned by his young wife sounded like a crime thriller. But it wasn't fiction. Bernard Chambers sat in his office on the 5th floor of the Chambers Development Group headquarters, staring out at springtime New York. Yesterday, he almost became a victim. Today, he was at the center of attention. But that wasn't what worried him most. He kept thinking about how many times over the past months he had seen warning signs and ignored them. "You should only make official statements with your lawyer," said his assistant, entering with a tablet in hand. "The press is going wild. Your stocks are holding for now, but the pressure will rise." Bernard nodded. He understood. His name was a brand, trusted, respected, and now it was on every headline, but with a different tone. "Where's the boy now?" he asked, still gazing out the window. "We found temporary housing for him, a private center, not a shelter. It's safe, good conditions. We've arranged security during the investigation." "Good. I want to speak with him tonight." Meanwhile, at the police station, Marissa sat in the interrogation room. Without makeup, wearing a gray sweatshirt, she looked both younger and older. She didn't look scared, more irritated. Her lawyer paced the room. "This is ridiculous. All of it is absurd," he kept repeating. "They have no direct evidence, just that supposedly a boy saw something. He's a homeless minor. They can't even prove you added the substance." "The cameras?" Marissa asked, staring into space. "Unfortunately, the camera above your table didn't work. Possibly a malfunction. That might work in our favor. But the soup analysis, that's a problem." She was silent for a moment. "I just wanted to leave gracefully," she said suddenly. "No divorce, no fighting, no court. He would have signed over everything anyway. He's old. A month or two and no one would have suspected. It's not like he's a child." The lawyer froze. "You just confessed." Marissa smirked. "Didn't you say they have no direct evidence?" By evening, Bernard arrived at the center where Malik was staying. It was a small suburban house, converted into a charity shelter. It was quiet, clean, smelled of food and warm wood. The boy was sitting in the common room, looking at a board game but not playing. "You did well yesterday," Bernard said, sitting beside him. "I haven't forgotten my promise." Malik gave a slight nod. He still didn't know whether to believe him. "Do you have a dream?" Bernard asked suddenly. "Yes," the boy said quietly. "Just to sleep at night without thinking about where to hide. Just to have my own toothbrush and to know there will be food tomorrow." Bernard nodded slowly, with pain in his chest. "You'll have all of that. If you don't mind, I'd like to become your guardian. Not immediately, of course, through the official process. But if you're okay with it, I'll help you get an education, a home, a normal life." Malik stayed silent, then suddenly asked, "Why do you believe me?" Bernard looked straight ahead. Because I didn't believe myself. But you did. You did the right thing despite everything. And that means you have something money can't buy. A conscience, courage, and a rare sense of when to speak up. He stood up. I'll leave you my card. A social worker will come tomorrow. Everything will be official. But the most important thing, you're not alone anymore. Bernard headed toward the door, and at that moment, Malik smiled for the first time in a long while, truly, without fear, without a mask. 2 days later, Marisa was officially charged. Her lawyers tried to lower the pressure, but the case had already drawn too much attention, too much evidence, too much public interest. Attempted murder by poisoning is a serious charge, even for people with powerful connections. As for Bernard, he appeared on magazine covers not as a victim, but as someone who survived betrayal and chose to trust again. In one interview, he said a phrase that was shared by all the newspapers. "A boy from the street saved me. That doesn't speak to my weakness. It speaks to his strength. As long as there are children like him in the world, we still have a chance." A month passed. Spring had fully arrived. New York streets bloomed with pink-white trees. Cafes placed tables outside on the sidewalks. Passers-by began to smile more often than they hid in their collars. The city, as always, moved on, even after the loudest scandals. It wasn't because it didn't care, but because it was always in a rush. But one thing remained. Bernard Chambers' name stayed in the headlines. The story of the poisoning, the scandal, the exposure, the interrogations, the trials, it still filled the news channels and morning shows. But one detail kept getting attention longer than the rest. The boy named Malik, who had saved the millionaire's life. In a spacious yet cozy Brooklyn townhouse living room, the air smelled of cookies and fresh coffee. Malik sat at the dining table, doing his homework. He wore a new hoodie and clean jeans. On the table lay a tablet with digital textbooks and a cup of hot cocoa beside it. "How's the math coming along?" Bernard asked as he entered the room with a warm bun in his hand. "Better than yesterday," Malik grinned. "I figured out fractions. They're kind of like sharing out on the street, only fairer." Bernard laughed. In a month, they had grown closer. Not like father and son yet. It was still too soon. But definitely more than just an adult and a rescued child. Malik no longer flinched at touch, no longer turned at every sound. He was getting used to the quiet, to having his own closet, to evening conversations. The guardianship was temporary, but Bernard had already filed for permanent custody. No one in the system objected. Everyone knew how it started, and they were happy to see how it was going. "You knew I might not believe you?" Bernard once asked on one of those quiet nights when they watched old movies together. "Yes," Malik answered. "But if you'd eaten the soup, there'd be no one left to believe." The trial against Marisa continued. Her defense tried to present her as mentally unstable, requested medical evaluations, and hinted at pressure and stress. But the prosecution was prepared and firm. Evidence, confessions, traces of the substance among her things, and financial documents showing she had secretly transferred money to unknown accounts. It all added up to a fairly simple, though bitter, picture. Bernard didn't attend every hearing. He hired good lawyers and chose not to waste his emotional energy. He had already survived betrayal. He didn't want to relive it. His focus was on Malik. One evening, they returned home later than usual, after a visit to the Natural History Museum. Malik had held binoculars for the first time and couldn't take his eyes off the dinosaur exhibit. "You wanted to be an archaeologist, right?" Bernard reminded him as the boy excitedly explained that dinosaurs were like forgotten clues from the past. "I did, and maybe now I actually can," Malik said softly, and there was something new in his voice. Hope. They had dinner on the terrace, with the quiet city noise below and the smell of fresh pizza, which Malik had helped heat up. Bernard watched him and thought how easily their paths might never have crossed. Everything had come down to a single second, a single choice, a single act of speaking up. "Remember when you said you wanted a toothbrush and a place to sleep?" Bernard asked later that night. Malik nodded. "Now you have that, and more. But if you ever want to go back to your old life, I won't stop you. Just know, you have a home, always." Malik didn't say anything. He just walked over and hugged him. For real. Without fear. Without armor. Some more time passed. Malik began studying at a private school. It turned out he picked things up faster than most kids his age. His teachers said he had an analytical mind. A supervisor from Child Services added, "Sometimes all it takes is one adult to change a child's life." But Bernard knew it was the other way around. Sometimes all it takes is one child to remind adults who they should be. The story made the news again, but this time in a different light. Bernard Chambers founded the Malik Foundation to help children living on the streets who hadn't lost their courage. The logo showed the silhouette of a boy standing at the door of a restaurant. Underneath was the foundation's motto, "A true hero is the one who tells the truth, even when the whole world stays silent."